Momentum for Trump means that it was this close on a snapshot over the weekend. This is what happened with Reagan. He gained strength every single day up through Election Day.
I want to put up two different pictures because it shows kind of the direction of both of these campaigns. You have Hillary campaigning with President Obama. So if you want more of the same, there's the answer. If you want more of change and anti-establishment, then on the left-hand side of the screen is Donald Trump with his family.
Folks, welcome inside the Parisi Palace, high above 2919 East Broadway. This is a special edition of the Jake Feinberg Show, coming to you live on Election Day 2016. Thank you for making us part of your day today. And without further ado, I want to bring back a friend of the program and a guy who dropped some serious enlightenment and knowledge on us the first time around. Looking forward to picking up where we left off. David Nichtern, welcome back to the Jake Feinberg Show.
Hi, Jake. Thank you. Good to be back with you.
You too, man. You know, I got to tell you, over the weekend, I had a conversation with a dear friend of mine who now is up in near Prescott, Arizona, harvesting a lavender farm, and he's been on my show several times, and he's a teacher of meditation. In and around the Arizona area, but he also did a 3-year retreat at Diamond Mountain. And I was telling him, I said, my show is fusing between, these musicians, these very talented, tasteful musicians, and their ethos and their look towards Eastern spirituality. I said, I just interviewed this guy, David Nichtern. And he goes, oh, I know David. I had dinner with him a couple months ago. His name is Will Duncan. Does that name ring a bell to you?
Uh-huh.
Yeah, Will Duncan is one of my best friends, and it put hair up on the back of my neck because it just continues to consolidate and validate this whole cycle of life. And all I'm saying is that he's a great cat. He said he had dinner with you. I know you guys aren't super close, but it was just bizarre we haven't talked in months, and then I bring up Nichtern's name and he had dinner with you. So you're obviously all over the place too.
Well, give him my best when you talk to him.
I certainly will. I wanted you to talk about, if you could, Jerry Garcia's spirituality. Where did he come down on spirituality, and if you guys ever got into any kind of, have you ever talked about that kind of stuff? Because to me, it was like you were clearly digging into Tibetan Buddhism at that time.
Right.
But I wanted you to talk about that Bay Area spirituality, if there was any at all.
Yeah, I think it was a kind of a time when a lot of people were looking to a lot of different things. And, kind of one of the big things, as you mentioned last time, was sort of Asian culture and spiritual traditions. Another was drug culture, and kind of use of, as you mentioned, the, LSD and things like that for sort of creating a more mellow and conscious environment. And, of course, the Grateful Dead were probably premier proponents of that latter culture, highly experimental. There were a lot of people around the culture who were doing different kinds of creative work, For example, they had a sound system that was completely revolutionary. They just had a whole almost, sort of community of people doing various things. But I think the fuel for a lot of it was more of a drug-oriented thing. So I don't, I played with Jerry, maybe 10 times and hung out some, so I don't think we ever really got into that kind of conversation particularly. It was just pretty mellow hang. He was Captain Mellow in those days. He was just a very, very mellow fellow and easygoing, very pleasant, very nice. But I don't think we ever had any kind of groundbreaking discussions about meditation or anything like that. It was just all in the air, and then everybody was kind of high a lot of the time.
Right.
Which was not really my main access point. I'm not saying I didn't imbibe along with the rest of the people, but it wasn't like, for some people, marijuana became almost a kind of constant source of tuning in a particular way. So I wouldn't really describe myself as primarily from that culture, although I certainly was part of it, and it was everywhere.
Yeah, I mean, were you able to? I mean, you obviously, once you started to collaborate with Maria and you fell in love with Northern California, was there some sort of temple or a sanctuary that you used to do a lot of meditation at to get away from the tuning in of the drug culture?
Well, in those days, there was, the beginnings of Dharma centers in Northern California. What would have been called a Dharma Dhatu at the time. There was one in Berkeley and one in San Francisco. I was living up in Marin County, so I wasn't really going there that much, and I was traveling a lot, including going to Boulder, which, as I mentioned last time, was the sort of center of the Shambhala Buddhist world with Trungpa Rinpoche. So I remember one time, we went and played. Actually, Jerry wasn't in the band, but Taj Mahal was in the band, and David Grisman and Richard Green, and we went and played at a club in Denver, and then I would go over to Boulder and hang out with the Dharma people there. So I was pretty much going back and forth between those realms, but maybe there were, during that time I was probably spending, more of the time in the music world.
Yeah, I think the club was called Ebbets Field.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
There's an amazing soundboard of that show that I just hung up the phone with Richard Green. I did an hour.
You did?
Yep. Just talked to Richard for an hour about a variety of things. One thing that was amazing to me is that due to physical limitations, he is no longer actively playing. Although he was up in Port Townsend, Washington, and was doing a chop. And what he created that chop technique on the fiddle. And he was doing it for a friend of his, and then he learned that David Grisman was living up there, and this is going back a couple months, and they hadn't played in 40 or 50 years, but it turns out they had a jam session like 2 months ago with David's son, and he said it was just fantastic. But he is not one thing that's fascinating to me is that he it's Paul McCartney. He said if Paul McCartney came and said, I want you to do your thing on my tour, or, he'd build his chops back up for that. Or if David called him, and, certain situations. But, he's not going out on the bandstand anymore. He's actually full-time photography, because to get back to that level is just too big a mountain to climb. And I wanted you to talk about your preparation when you, even on musically, but just as a teacher of Buddhism, how you prepare yourself so that you are at your ultimate peak when you are attempting to get people to touch people's hearts and not enlighten, but awaken them. I mean, the Buddhist, the Tao master came from Los Angeles a couple weeks ago. And I don't have a deep relationship with him, but he's Taiwanese, and we talked for a minute. He goes, after we talked, he goes, you have the ability to awaken people. He told that to me. So I want you to talk about how you get into the optimal strata to awaken cats.
Yeah, that's a great question in a way, because whether you learn about or even master some form of content is one thing, but another thing is how much you can transmit kind of the essence of what that content was generated for in the first place. So Buddhism would really fall well into that category of what is sort of the point of it all, other than creating a system of learning and knowledge that feeds on itself, which that's very common in the human world, that things just get into a whole realm of activity, and then you go, when you're in that realm of activity, it all makes sense. But as soon as you step out of it, what is the carryover? Like, if you think about chess or something like that, you could become the best chess master in the world, and it doesn't necessarily carry over into how you live your daily life. Right?
Exactly.
So that could actually be true, oddly enough, for spiritual practice. People get into these very arcane practices, do very deep retreats and so forth, and study and develop it. But really, the testing ground is, how you conduct yourself in everyday life, and how those principles are actually manifesting in you and your life, which is sort of generally called transmission. You're actually not just teaching details and data, but you're actually transmitting the essence of something. So that always is a sort of standout question in the Buddhist realm of, like, there was a very famous teacher who was a sort of university professor named Naropa. And in fact, that's who Naropa University is named after, in Boulder, in Colorado. And he was walking on the campus one day. He was like a PhD in Buddhism. He was walking on the campus one day, and this old hag appeared to him and said, Naropa, do you understand the words of the teaching? And he said, well, I do. Yes, I do. And she sort of nodded. And then she said, well, do you understand the sense of the teachings, the meaning? And he kind of got flustered, and he said, yeah. And then she mocked him, like she completely humiliated him, and then disappeared. But before she disappeared, she said, if you really want to understand the sense of the teachings, you have to find my brother Tilopa. Now, Tilopa was a crazy yogi who it took him 12 years to find, and he was living on the banks of a river and eating the fish heads that the fishermen
love
left
this
behind.
story.
This is a guy who's a PhD in Buddhist studies, and he's looking for his Buddhist master, and he keeps going around saying, do you know where Tilopa is? Do you know where Tilopa is? And he finally finds him, and he's just an old bum who's living on the banks of the river, an old yogi, And that was his teacher. Then he followed him around for another 12 years, really kind of being put into, very challenging situations over and over again, until he finally sort of dropped off some of his conceptual baggage and kind of opened more. And so then he got transmission from Tilopa Tilopa took off his sandal and smacked him across the face, and he had a kind of full realization experience on the spot after those 24 years of leading up to it. So this is like a, very fun and colorful and true story about the lineage of Buddhism in Tibet that I come from. And, it's symbolic of the necessity of marrying the kind of conceptual understanding with the actual experience of the essence. So I would say the key to that is really deep practice, that you have some sense of practice, and also maybe understanding that practice is not a separate topic, but it's really in every moment of life. You have the opportunity to, as you would say, connect with the Tao, or connect with the kind of more ignorant and blocked, obscured state of mind. So that's something that when I'm teaching people, I first of all, I recognize that as the ultimate point of what we're doing, rather than that we're just learning some, how to play chess, three-dimensional chess intellectually. So part of that is just being very present with people and being very open and listening carefully to what they say and looking at them and feeling where they're coming from, and not trying to superimpose just a system on everybody that's just like one size fits all, but really trying to meet people's minds, in a meaningful way. So, and I think, that's true, for example, music too. It's the exact same thing. Some musicians just have all the scales, and, that's not what music's about.
Right.
So it's all about transmission or actual experience, being connecting with people and connecting with their experience.
That was pretty profound. This is a two-part question. Can you talk about one of the challenging situations that your mentor found himself in with, I think it's Tilopa, did you say?
Well, it was Tilopa and Naropa. This was like 1,200 years ago.
Right, but you said, so Naropa was flustered by the hag, and then he eventually connected
with his mentor.
With his mentor, and what was one of these challenging situations that tested his understanding of the essence?
Well, Tilopa was kind of the model for a yogic style of transmission, which is unconventional. And what happened later, and this is a very interesting for people who are interested in this history of Buddhism. We're now in India, maybe I think around somewhere between the 5th and the 8th century AD in India. And because Buddhism had already flowered in India as a monastic institution. So at some point, the monastic institution, or the sort of more formal approach to studying and practicing, kind of connected to the yogic style or the freelance, the freestyle thing. And that's where you get Vajrayana Buddhism from, Tantric Buddhism. It's really a merger of a kind of yogic style with a monastic style. And it can be sort of, it can be presented either way. So, for example, my teacher, bring this right up to the present moment, now it's 1,200 years later, Buddhism had gone from India to Tibet, like in the 8th century AD. And now it's 1,200 years later, and the product of that evolution, that system, is now coming to the United States.
Right.
And interestingly enough, Trungpa Rinpoche came out of Tibet as a monk. He was raised as a monk, with all the vows and everything, the robes and the monastic, precepts and all that. But when he got to the West in England, he just said, I don't think this is going to work over here. People will just be fascinated with that. They'll sort of adopt a false sense of reverence for the robes and the style of the teachings and the Tibetan culture. And he said, I got to really communicate with people. And so he took off his robes and he became, a regular citizen and taught from that platform of being, somebody who was sort of sharing the lifestyle that we had at that time. So that was somebody going from a sort of monastic thing to a more secular kind of presentation as a skillful means for communicating with the people who were around him. But he never really lost his level of discipline, even in the midst of manifesting very unconventional ways at times. So he manifested as a yogi, but he really had the discipline of the monastic tradition too.
I'm finding in my own life what we're talking about is I'm coming up pretty short in some respects with my kids in sort of where I can do, where I can entertain and, and I can juggle, a myriad of different musicians in this case, and keep them entertained and occupied and ultimately try to transmit some of the enlightenment all over the world using new media. When it comes to my family, I tend to really come up, short. I'm just not consistent with transmission. And really leading and showing by example. I know your son is in fact the cat Evan Cressman, who I connected you with, knew the name Nichtern because of your son.
Mm-hmm.
And I just
not unusual these days.
Sure. Yeah. So but what I think
very well known.
Yeah. So what I'd like you to talk about, if you could, is a challenge that you had as a father transmitting, and then ultimately, because he's obviously following in your footsteps, and he's growing. He's growing his own I don't want to say brand, but he's growing. He's cultivating his own true nature. Can you talk about a time or a specific thing that you were struggling with, insofar as it's not just some precepts that you were internalizing, but actually able to put out into your real world?
Wow, there's so many different elements to that question, but it's a juicy one. And
just riff on it.
First of all, I just want to say my son's name is Ethan Nichtern, and he's a very well-known Buddhist teacher and author. He's got 3 books out, including one called The Road Home, which is a very contemporary take on the Buddhist teachings, very accessible. And he travels all over and teaches, and he's, as the next generation from ours, he's in demand because there's a lot of old Buddhists around, and then there was sort of a gap for a while of people, taking on for whatever reason, and now it seems to be flourishing again. So as a father, for example, when he was a boy, I had no idea that he was going to become a Buddhist teacher. I certainly didn't forecast that outcome. I didn't push for that outcome in any way. It just so happens I was the director of Karmic Chilling Meditation Center in Vermont while he was 0 to 2. It might have made an impression on him, to have grown up the first 2 years of his life in a contemplative center. Not that he was like a year and a half and meditating, for 2 hours at a time. But he did grow up, exposed to it more than probably a lot of kids would. But really then he just took to it very, very organically at a certain point. And at this point, I would say, we teach together sometimes, like we're going to teach a Shambhala training program, level 1 in January. We do that every year for the last 6 years. And a lot of people come, and we just co-teach it. We co-lead it. And also we definitely talk about Dharma all the time, and we're in the same lineage, the Shambhala lineage. So we have a lot of things to talk about. But in that capacity, I would have to say that probably I think of him as like a Dharma brother.
I love it.
I mean, he's my biological son, but in this capacity, he's a very serious practitioner and teacher, and we go back and forth about it. And there's no feeling of like pulling rank or anything like that. It's a very equal conversation as far as I'm concerned, and very loving one, very respectful and fun. Because we have similar sense of humor about the whole thing, and a kind of similar, maybe acidic, cutting through kind of the baloney level of it all and what's really going on. It seems to be part of our similar kind of approach. And now, as a dad growing up, of course, we went through every phase probably that every father and son has gone through, and including a divorce, between me and his mom when he was 10 years old. So that certainly left, had powerful imprints. And I tried very hard to be a good dad through that. I wanted to stay around and be part of his life. So, I didn't move away. We were all living in New York. I just moved about 10 blocks away so I could continue being his dad. And it was very, very important to me. So, but as a teenager, did he, kind of like have his friends over and empty the scotch bottles and pour back in colored water? Sure.
I mean, what was, I guess, just
it's pretty normal is what I'm trying to say.
No, I dig. I really
Mm-hmm.
dig it. I mean, it's like we talked last time about, this wave of gurus, spiritualists that came to our country during a certain time, and
right.
a lot of musicians gravitated to it. People like Felix Cavallari and McLaughlin.
Mm-hmm.
Can you
Sure.
talk? Can you talk? I mean, I don't really think. I mean, were you? Was it just this gravitational pull towards Tibetan Buddhism, or were you ultimately trying? Did you have vices, and were you truly trying to break away from any substances, or what was the reason why did this path find you, or did you want to? I mean, because all I'm saying is to go with Will Duncan, the cat that you had dinner with.
Mm-hmm.
I met him. He was my first interview before I started my show. It was the first. I've done 500 now. He was my first
Mm-hmm.
interview on the back porch of a place called the Rabbit Ranch here in Tucson, and he was about to embark on a 3-year retreat in isolation with his beautiful girlfriend 20 feet away in a hut that they both built. These huts, and he went away 3 years on Diamond Mountain in Bowie, Arizona. I'm not sure if you've ever been to Diamond Mountain before. And it's like, it was, I was thinking about him through the whole time, and it's a lot of contemplation. But I'm just asking, I mean, it was something that was so, I'm not saying he was super excited about it, but he was totally in it for the organic right reasons. And I'm just trying to figure out your reasoning for actually going into Tibetan Buddhism and channeling it the way you have.
Yeah, and a good and a fair question too. Is like, it's kind of, there's a couple of different ways to answer that. One is like, when you're a kid and they go, okay, you're going to play in the orchestra, pick an instrument.
Yep.
And one kid for some reason picks out the tuba, and another one picks out the piccolo, and
congas.
Yeah, I mean, there's some proclivities that we have towards certain, ways of doing things, ways of looking at things. And then, if I was giving you kind of the most honest answer, I would say there was what I would call karmic connection between myself and particularly Trungpa Rinpoche. So I think I might have been interested in Tibetan Buddhism altogether at a certain point, But I certainly wasn't really that interested in the monastic or religious kind of dimension of it, although it was very moving to me because they were obviously a very compassionate kind of tribe. I remember seeing a movie when I was very young called something like Exile from Tibet or something like that, and I saw these monks walking down a path in the movie, and then they stopped and they moved a snail off the path so that nobody would step on it. Wow. And I thought, wow, these guys look really friendly and loving and nice and, and compassionate. And also there was a kind of, I always had a sort of mystical or magical connection to China and Tibet. Like I remember even as a child thinking like I used to like to go down to Chinatown and see those Chinese kung fu movies. But the one that was my favorite was called A Taste of Zen. And these guys were they were kung fu guys, but they were also like really major, martial artists. So
it was it was really a karmic connection, though, very much.
Yeah, and then when I told you last time when I saw Trungpa Rinpoche, by the end of that first weekend, there was like a very strong seal of connection that was very intuitive, but really strong. And I think I mentioned also that I just had some kind of dream about it, and I quit my job and went up and studied with him. So these things, and now the book, that we're talking about, my new book, Awakening from the Daydream, is really completely a result of having studied with him of that material in the early 70s. So there's a through line there of my connection with him that is probably the strongest thread. Is he Tibetan? Yeah, he's Tibetan. Do I like Tibetans? Love them. Do I like Japanese and Zen? Really love it. I have a Chinese teacher too. I guess I feel like if, among our friends, people we know, there's some who are sort of more, sort of naturally drawn to shamanism and sort of Indian kind of culture, Western Indian kind of culture. There's ones that are drawn to India and there's kind of Hindu cosmology and that kind of culture and the bhakti or devotional tradition. And then there's the Asian people. And I feel like, I've always just felt a kinship with Asian culture and the kind of pristine quality of it, the discipline, the aesthetic, the ancientness of it. So somewhere, if you believe in those kind of things, probably I have some kind of ongoing connection with that. And it'd be hard to think that I don't have that with Trungpa Rinpoche. It seems like that's really, kind of a fact or something like that. Just there's no way to argue about it.
Did your first wife did you guys separate because of this connection and the fact that you wanted to really carve out a new trail, and she would have preferred you to just maintain some sort of domesticated insanity life?
No, because I married her in 1978, so I was already well into it.
Oh wow, and that was the year I was born.
Well, congratulations.
Your wedding bells and my birth.
I could have been your father too.
No, you and my dad would have a ball together. He's out in Stony Brook. Go ahead, continue.
Okay. So she was already somewhat into the. I met her sort of through friends through the community, the Buddhist community. So she was also part of that. Although I would say at the point when I met her, she was a little less into it than I was, but she's still into it to this day. So we're part of the same community and the same teaching lineage, and she had that very strong connection with Trungpa Rinpoche also. So yeah, I didn't have to push her off there, but here's the thing for our listeners to really know or consider or whatever. Even though sometimes spirituality is presented as a sort of magical mystery ride, go up and wear robes and see Maharishi, the Maharishi and play sitars and eat, yogurt and applesauce and have, just have a jolly old time. That is not the spirituality that I know, to be honest with you.
Yeah. What is what is that? Yeah, break that down.
In the book, Awakening from the Daydream, which I was telling you about the last time, my book, that's described as, in the Wheel of Life, as the kind of God realm version of spirituality, or Devaloka. So there's a kind of honey and bliss. And my teacher was absolutely scathing about that kind of practice. I'll be honest with you. He wrote the book called Cutting Through Spiritual Materialism. That was document at the time of not getting just caught up in kind of materialistic approaches towards spiritual practice. What does that mean? It means spiritual practice is going to be challenging. It's going to be hard. It's going to take effort. It's going to take exertion. It's going to take discipline. It's going to stretch you. It's going to make you look at your habits. It's going to be clarifying. It's going to be something you have to lean into even in hard times. So that's my type of view, is rather than just like this is the easy path towards some kind of bliss realm. That is not. I recommend if that's what you're looking for, you don't try Buddhism.
I mean, can you talk about? I mean, it's having a ball here with David Nichtern. Set 2, really an exploratory set. But can you relay tease us with a story or something that very pertinent to you in this new book that came out that can sort of you just threw out that word spiritual materialism. It seems like that we're locked into that really heavily, and I think in the Western world, and one reason there is a renaissance of Eastern spirituality is a rebirth of sorts, is just this idea of, I mean, I was listening today to some sports talk radio, and it's like these guys are showing up late to a team meeting and consistently, and the fines are like, the coach could fine them $10,000-$20,000, and these guys are making tens of millions of dollars.
Right.
It doesn't even matter. It doesn't even matter.
It's like you and me throwing a penny in a jar.
Yeah, and then you look back on the macro level and say, my God, we have all this systemic poverty, working poor. No one's talking about redistribution, but we're just talking about it from the point of view of where are the values are way out of whack. And can you?
Well, hey, Bernie was talking about it.
Absolutely. No, hey, listen. So can so we don't get all political. I mean, it's the idea here is just like, it's so warped. And my daughter's in the back seat trying to process this stuff. She's not going to be able to do it right now, but it's like almost embarrassing in some ways for me, where I'm just trying to cobble together enough to put food on the table so we can live, and with my wife as well. And it's like, these cats don't even care if they're showing up late to a practice, because it's just like they're making more money. What I'm trying to say, can you take a story in your book and talk about that as it relates to your philosophy towards not getting sucked into the spiritual capitalism?
Spiritual materialism.
Spiritual materialism. Thank you.
Yeah. So just let's define for everybody who's listening what we mean by that. What spiritual materialism is: using spiritual techniques and methods and practices to buffer yourself, to increase your sense of comfort zone, and actually insulates you from these sort of more challenging aspects of reality in an artificial way. And doesn't really, it just creates a kind of superficial but seemingly pleasurable approach towards the whole idea of developing oneself, as opposed to, some kind of more genuine or authentic or deeply, rooted kind of sense of exploration and finding, who one really is. This is not a judgment you throw onto other people. It's really a warning to ourselves is the main point, right? You don't just say, oh, they're doing this. You look and you go, am I doing this?
Right.
So it could be wrapped in the language of self-denial, in of kind of obfuscation, smoke and mirrors. And we take a kind of approach when we're doing our practice. We say, I don't want to be doing that. So in the classical Buddhist tradition, there are these energies called protectors, and you invite them to come and kind of, in a way, if you're just becoming a kind of a fake, you invite them to cut your head off, basically.
Right.
So the language is very, very vivid. If I'm doing that, then, really, really cut through is what it's saying. So, this is hard. I think this is for me, the reason I like the Wheel of Life so much and why I wrote the book about it is it outlines the different ways in which we get sort of trapped into kind of very conventional ways of being and states of mind. And the two higher realms, the God realm and the jealous God realm, are where we're really trying to manipulate reality so that it's always comes out the way we want it to, basically. Now, for example, in reality, nobody wants to die. If you bring me somebody who wants to die, I mean, I'm not talking about somebody who's suicidal.
Sure.
But most beings want to live, and they want to be happy, and they want to live a good life. So the idea that death is the most, when Al Gore wrote his movie, The Inconvenient Truth, the real inconvenient truth is impermanence, is that we're all going to die. And that's why that's the hardest challenge for many, many people to deal with is their own impermanence, or even as they approach it and their hair turns gray, or if a woman, starts having plastics, or a man, for that matter, starts having plastic surgery, you're trying to sustain something that's unsustainable. And that becomes very painful. But while it's happening, you're really kind of fighting very hard to preserve that. And that's called the jealous God realm. And we're seeing that a lot in politics, where somebody goes, I don't want to lose. Winning is the only thing. And I think today is a very interesting day because it's the election. And guess who's going to lose? The guy who only likes to win is going to lose today.
We have to hope. I mean, I feel good.
I'm not hoping. I'm telling you.
Good. Well, I mean, I also feel like you can't hate your way to win. You can't hate to win. You can't hate so much that.
Well, you can. It's called. Actually, we should be really on our toes about it, because hating your way to winning is the essence of autocracy, oligarchy, dictators, and it's an instinct that can emerge any time. And this is something in the spiritual tradition of, for example, of Tibetan Buddhism. They give pretty serious warnings about this. Like, if you begin to puff up from your practice, begin to become a kind of spiritual monster of sorts, like a spiritual ego is considered more dangerous than just garden variety ego. And so there's a lot of warnings if you start to use these practices as a way of developing a kind of impenetrable sense of ego, and you start to lord over your students and disciples, or abuse them in some way, in a codependent way. This is very much not considered the right way to go about it.
No, I guess I didn't articulate it very well. I guess what I was trying to say is my hope is that a majority of people in this country don't vote for hate. That's all I'm trying to say.
And what a great prayer in a way. And,
right.
When you see the higher consciousness, of and if you want to just call it the neocortex as opposed to the amygdala part of the brain, the part that's actually trying to put things together in a kind of larger perspective, which is different parts of your brain have different roles to play. Even looking at it just anatomically, certain people represent the point of view that you're talking about. And, I don't mind talking about politics. I'm not talking about it as a...
Sure.
I don't think being spiritual exempts you from your commitment to being part of the political system that you're living in.
I think of civic duties, Yeah.
Yeah, and I look at Obama and I go, no, this is when somebody is sort of telling the truth but not creating a kind of a derision and division, or there's some playfulness and humor in it. So it's just the real monster is ego clinging. From a Buddhist point of view, none of these storylines that we're running have any more power than the fundamental notion of clinging to a false sense of I as the center of the universe, and pushing back against the way things are, and pushing back against your natural wisdom, pushing back against some kind of honesty and authenticity, pushing back against compassion. That is the monster. And every one of us has a piece of it in it, a piece of it in us. And so we don't just say, look at the monster over there. We try to find that, our own little monster and go like, okay, it's time for us to talk.
That to me, that comes with cultivation, because the idea is that there's too many cats that are not doing that, and they project, instead of looking at that internally yourself, they're projecting and they're spewing all this toxicity out at everybody else. That to me is the lack of the lack of the mirror Also, this is the major, and I've been thinking about this with your son.
But hey, Jake,
Yeah,
before you jump off
Yeah.
that, that's why I like when Michelle Obama said, "When they go low, we go high." I mean, that's a profound statement in a way. And in the Shambhala tradition, warriorship, she's really summing it up pretty good there. Even if you're the only one, you still go high. And even if the world is completely given into a set of dark impulses, and the code of a practitioner or warrior is you still hold to your principles, even in that kind of situation. So, times get relatively lighter and darker depending how popular some of those ideas are. In Shambhala, we're pretty positive that things go around and turn around at a certain point, but not by themselves. I mean, it needs to be based on kind of people cultivating. So all the things you're talking about that you do and other people do are kind of cultivating their more healthier nature,
Absolutely. No, I kind of wanted to ask you about what I find at 38 is that, my beard is half gray at this point. I'm very proud of that because I'm marinating in this whole whole existence. And again, I am not my ability to transmit this stuff into real time is not all there. But my idea, this is the whole point, is that one thing I do see within our socio-political construct is just your generation still functioning at a high level, working well into their 70s and 80s, having a hard time leaving the stage for your son, myself, younger generations of cats to take over this wheel. And and I want you to talk to the audience worldwide about people that go get the plastic surgery. I mean, do what you got to do, but ultimately how to acquiesce and in their own way relent to younger people and stop with the idea that this whole thing that we are going to heck in a handbasket and that everything is terrible when it's not. I mean, there are cats you're dealing with them, I'm sure. It's your generation and a little bit older. They are the shrill whine has reached the apex. How can you talk about moving off center stage?
Yeah, well, myself, I never occupied center stage deliberately. So,
right.
So here's the twist on that. Personally, just speaking personally for a minute, 90% of my activity is with people your age.
Wow.
And younger, and not from the point of view me training them to take over whatever it is you think that we're talking about here. So, for example, I have I think 5 meditation teacher training programs going on around the world. One in Tokyo, one in a sort of national kind of business meditation situation called the Journey Meditation Program, and with 3 or 4 other yoga studios that host these things because they're the closest thing to a container that can hold onto it. So for me, and I have, I would say, mentees or whatever you want to call it, or just young friends who I'm trying to work with in terms of their practice, and also them developing vehicles for doing exactly what you're talking about, not just for themselves but for other people. And that's got to be 70-80% of my activity right now. And so I have son, I would call them my sons and daughters. They're it's a metaphor. As you know, like in the Chinese system, Sifu means father. I mean, you have the father guru in Tibetan Buddhism. It's not a literal thing. It's just this kind of spiritual family. Mm-hmm. But I have what I would consider my mentees, just to use a non-sectarian kind of word, and that is exactly the plan. Is they were going to do this, and I am no longer thinking, and I never really did think of myself as a prime activator in that. I'm an enabler. That's what I always was, even with my own teachers and situations. I never was in center stage, but passing that capacity on so that people like you could handle this next cycle of history is a dead knowledge that the generation you're talking about, which is my generation, a friend of mine said, "Hey, they're firing at our regiment," which was the cutest way I heard of saying it. People are dropping. you look at the guy on the left and his musket's on the ground and he's like bleeding. You go like, what happened to you, man? So it doesn't take a genius to figure out that the older people, and this is a time-honored thing, should move into a more mentoring and advisory kind of capacity.
Exactly. Not the task, not the berating and the task, but the mentoring part of it. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to break you on that.
Yeah, no, that's exactly. So I'm with you on that. Let's just say we agree about that. But at the same time, there's another flip, which is that there's always more training for all of us all along the way. So you have to look and see where you can get the best training, and understand the value of that. So that's just that depends. That depends on the situation. I was 20 when I found my teacher, and he was always 9 years older than me. So maybe I was 22 and he was 31. That's exactly right. So he was 7 years younger than you are now. Wow. And he was already a guru,
Wow.
And highly qualified and very dynamic. But that would be rarer in the West, although now you have, people like Ethan who've been raised from a young age. But it's rare that somebody's had extreme training, because in our culture we don't train people from youth except in very rare circumstances at a very kind of intense level. We like to let them grow up and find their own way in this culture. That's part of our culture. So it's usual that somebody is at least 20 or 22 before they start going, hey, I want to be into this or that.
Real simple. This is phenomenal. Why? And I'm not comparing him at all, but I'm also curious about this dynamic going on, the schizophrenia within the United States, where you have Barack Obama, very exotic name, family, seems to intertwine humor with intellect, can be a bit wonkish, never loses his temper, seems to me to be a decent guy. Okay, he's not like, a decent person. And then I go to Gandhi.
Yeah, the vilification of him is.
Well, what I'm trying to get at is this: why all of a sudden, not all of a sudden, but it rears its ugly head when things like certain characters come about. Why do we demonize leaders? If we consider them leaders, then why are we demonizing them? I listen to a lot of hate radio, and I make sure my daughters listen to it as well, so that they know that it's there, that it's not some daisy chain.
Sure.
And so, the idea is, how can you demonize somebody and hate them if you don't even know them personally? And I'm just trying to say, how have we gotten to this point where, like our spiritual figures, like your mentor, like Gandhi, how would they be received in our berserko capitalistic society now? I'm really curious about why we demagogue people we consider. And I realize there's a large silent majority that is going to probably elect Hillary Clinton. You say definitely that reelected Barack Obama. There's definitely a silent majority that or a minority that keeps their head down, puts one foot in front of the other, and are decent people. But I'm just trying to figure out why we are now, if we consider these people leaders, why do we demagogue them? Why do we make them out to be absolutely evil people?
Well,
Professor Nichtern.
Yeah.
All I'm saying is I'm trying to figure it out, because if you truly hate somebody, you should actually know them personally, right? You should try to.
Well, no. You will know them by their deeds is not a completely specious comment. However, just peeling away some of the layers, you tend, Jake, to ask multi-layered questions.
Yep.
That could be taken on a number of different levels. So, one level of that, really two major responses I have to it. One is, I really think that the media, constant narcissism of our culture to watch ourselves go to the bathroom, basically.
Yep.
We take our little video camera into the bathroom and Facebook the fact that we're taking a crap. You know what I mean? And
unless you're transcribing Nichternian comments and blowing them out all over the world. But continue. Yeah. No, I get it. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, in other words, we've become totally a boredom culture. We fill every imaginable space, and we're a narcissist culture, which is we watch ourselves. But we're not necessarily, the twist of narcissism is that it's actually an expression of self-hatred rather than self-love.
Mm-hmm. Very powerful statement.
That is, it's an important thing to think about, because you go, oh, well, this person seems so powerful and so full of themselves. But actually what they are is monstrously insecure. And it's really just a blow-up doll of the ordinary situations, which we're somewhat insecure and somewhat egotistic. It's kind of like, let's blow this out to its fullest extent. Yeah, I don't know who I am. I don't really have genuine confidence in my heart and mind. So I will build a tremendous monument, a tremendous edifice. I'm thinking of that statue of Saddam Hussein.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, why do you need a big statue of yourself? Can't you just look in the mirror and see the person? It's just very interesting that somebody would want to blow themselves up to those proportions. But it is, I believe, a mirror image of all of us because of a lack of confidence, basically, in who we truly are, which is something you feel from the inside out, not from the outside in. And so I don't think what we're seeing is anything other than a kind of like a blow-up of the basic human dilemma, which is not really being sure of who we are, what our place in the universe is, whether we're good or bad, whether we deserve to live or die, that kind of cosmic almost insecurity. And so therefore we would build some kind of construction around it. That is what we mean by ego, and it's not really the right word for it, but self, false sense of self. And then that false sense of self goes out and creates, like as I described in the book, the six realms, and a sense of a daydream that we're kind of living in a fantasy in a way. We're not able to abide moment by moment in kind of sense of being present with everything that's around us. So we've created a hero, a central character, which is the big statue of Saddam Hussein, if you take it to its extreme, and a world in which we can achieve some kind of dominance, either through pleasure or pain.
Talking to David Nichtern here on the Jake Feinberg Show. Can you talk about the first time that you collaborated musically with Krishna Das and how transcendent your relationship was? Was it an immediate thing? And I'll be honest, he was not on my radar until you mentioned him last time. So I'm just curious when you guys first collaborated musically and how that all went down.
Well, so just to bring everybody up to speed, within certain worlds, Krishna Das is extremely well known because within, for example, the yoga community or the Indian devotional Western community, he's the big dog. He's like the Bill Monroe of kirtan.
I love it. The Tao of bluegrass. Continue.
Yeah, or like think of anybody who's a genre breaker like Miles Davis,
sure.
Or who just like Bill Monroe created the genre of bluegrass essentially, with other people.
I dig.
So kirtan was this chanting music in India. It still is. It's folk music. It's spiritual folk music. People get together with a harmonium and maybe some percussion instruments, and there's somebody called the kirtan wala. Wala is like the the person who serves it up, and they chant, and then the rest of the people respond. So it's like a call and response. The simple premise of it is they consider it to be the names that they're chanting are not ordinary names, but they're divine names. They call it the names of God, or divine names. And it's not so much a question of somebody said it is. It's just these names have that kind of resonance, and they don't really refer to sort of our ordinary world of personality. They're kind of a deeper level. So by repeating those in those traditions, they consider that you're, pacifying your neurotic habitual states of mind and opening up your heart and becoming more mindful and more compassionate just by that practice, by steadily doing that. So it's fun too because it starts going, and then it gets faster and faster a lot of the time. So it's a little bit like Western gospel music, it just starts to hop and jump and people start to jump around, and it's really, really fun. And musically, if you have a great bunch of musicians playing, which we do, it really starts to cook big time. It's like playing. It's like a spiritual version of the Orange Blossom Special.
Oh, I love it. I mean, just get me. I just want to be marinating in that. That's unbelievable.
Yeah. Well, you can pick up the last record of Krishnadas is called Kirtanwala, which I produced and play guitar on. And if somebody wanted to sample it, you could certainly listen to that. But a lot of people pick up on it and they go, "Oh my God, this is sublime. This is just really, really fantastic." And a lot of people are sort of move in and out of the community to do that practice. So it has a really strong life force of its own. And, we played in New York Saturday night, a concert, and there was like 1,500 people there.
Get out of here.
Oh, yeah. Yep.
You and Krishna Das
Yep.
did?
Well, the whole band, Krishna Das, and I played guitar, and Mark Egan, who's one of the world's great bass players, was playing bass, and John McCall playing percussion, and then and keyboards, and then Arjun plays tabla. So it's sort of a hybrid. It's sort of it's a very interesting thing, and I'll get back to you how I met KD.
Yeah.
Everybody calls him KD, but just to give the present sort of vibe of it, it's kind of a hybrid of Indian and Western music. It's really more Western, but with a few Indian instruments. And KD has an amazing voice. Krishnadas has this really deep, rich, resonant voice that a lot of people get transported by just the sound of his voice. It's just so awesome. And it's a voice that would be, I don't know if you kind of thought of how he sings. It's sort of not that different from Bruce Springsteen or Tom Waits. Or in my estimation, he could have, if he'd gone secular, he would have been one of those guys, like a very major singer-songwriter type of guy. But he dedicated his music to this practice. And he would just go around in yoga studios 20 years ago, and it was his practice. So he just do these kirtans for 6 or 8 people and just pick up his harmonium and go to the next place. It had nothing to do with building a career, So it just grew because people were magnetized by it. And now, I know people who are dying to listen to it. Baby listening to it.
Who's the bass? Who's the bass player?
Well, in this weekend we had my friend Mark Egan played bass.
Mark Egan. Mark Egan.
Yeah, and you can look him up. But he's played with. He was in Pat Metheny's band.
No. I mean, University of Miami product, I think. Miami University.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. No, that was the whole thing with Jocko and those cats. Yeah.
Yeah, but I brought people like him and Jerry Murata in on this thing, and so when we do the records, we work with some great musicians, and it's so when I first met Katie, I didn't know anything about kirtan. It was new to me, but a flute player that I work with, Bansuri flute, I did a lot of music for that community through my label called Dharma Moon. I had my own record label called Dharma Moon. And I had 2 labels. I had Dharma Moon, which was sort of yoga, world music, and I had 5 Points Records, which was a kind of indie label. And the last artist that I signed to 5 Points Records was Lana Del Rey.
Wow.
So I'm sure people are going to know who that is. So we had a pop thing, and then we also had this kind of world music thing. And this guy, Steve Gorn, who was the flute player with me in a band called Drala, Drala, which is great kind of world music outing that we had, introduced me to Krishna Das, and I went down there and I heard them play, and I thought, geez, they're just playing the same thing over and over again for days. They just get into a groove and they just chant. So, and in India you could do it all night, So, but then as I got to know him, I felt like there's something really genuine in him. And in fact, he's a Jew from Long Island. And we're practically the same age, and we know all the same old TV shows. I kid him because I said, "Look, you're the only person I know who I can watch NFL football with, and during the breaks, we're going to talk about the Bardo teachings."
Right.
So we're like brothers of a kind of similitude of interests and spiritual and worldly kind of interests, and so he's become a great friend, and I loved it, and it's a beautiful community, very, very warm-hearted, good people, and that's the one we go to. In a month, we're all going to Maui to play at a festival with Ram Dass, who was one of Krishna Das's earlier mentors. So it all ties in together. All these roads connect through various ways, and there's a lot of people coming towards this. That similarly, there's young people coming towards this. One of the guys who came to the last retreat was Pete Holmes, who's a very well-known young comedian, exactly your age too, 38. And so people pick up on this stuff, and then they want to know through us, what was it like to work with these I call them the blues masters.
Right.
The old gurus who aren't going to be anymore, actually. The same way the old blues masters aren't going to be anymore. The same way there's not going to be another Bill Monroe.
I was going to say, I need to get down to Hawaii to catch that. I mean, I need to get into what venue do you play at, like in New York?
Well, in New York, we played at this church of St. Paul and St. Andrew, which is up on 86th Street and West End Avenue, which is a big old church, and we do that every November usually. This weekend, we're going up to a place called Menla Institute, which is in Phoenicia, New York, upstate New York, near Woodstock area. And we just park out there for 4 days, and he often has a Buddhist teacher with him, either Sharon Salzberg or somebody else. In this case, it's Bob Thurman, who's a very famous Buddhist teacher and one of the vintage classical Tibetan Buddhist guys in the West. He was the chair at Columbia University, and he's also happens to be Uma Thurman's dad. So that's a whole other cross line there. So yeah, we're going to be there for 4 days, and we'll be chanting all day and hanging out, and eating and talking and being human together. And honestly, if you want my opinion, this is a big part of what's missing these days. It's like some kind of coming together. And if you want my recommendation to the 38-year-olds of the world, it's like create community.
Well, that's what I've been doing for 5 years. Is just creating my own community. It's intergenerational. It is about, concepts and conceptual. Has nothing to do with theory or anything like that, although sometimes it intertwines. But that's really been it. Has been this craving for, and maybe I never really even experienced it before in my life, but that's sort of the path that I'm on now. And it's just I'm just trying to visualize, trying to get a handle behind these concerts, because I also would love to see your record collection at some point and see how much counterpoint, esoteric, non such label stuff you have, and that's the Sufi music, that kind of stuff, But to see it in the live setting would be transcendent.
Well, and that's the other thing, is creating community. Obviously, a woman just wrote me from Denmark yesterday who wants to study meditation with me, which will obviously be via Skype. But there's also, and so the internet has been a great boon in terms of creating a certain level of community and like-mindedness. But if you're really in the business of creating community, some of it has to be live. And you have to actually see people and touch them and eat together and, wash the dishes and that kind of stuff. We can't, if we get too far away from that, we'll think what's happening with a lot of the, not your generation, but the one younger than you, is they're starting to demonstrate dissociative behavior, from having been too wired. And I'm not an enemy of technology in any way. I love technology. So it's just you have to balance it with some kind of visceral experience at a certain point, like actually getting dirty,
Well, actually doing it, just doing it. And not in
that's what I mean.
Not in a virtual way. That can be a great break for set 2. We can pick up on set. I hope we can do set 3 after your return from Hawaii. It'd be great to talk about the younger generation and how, if they're willing to actually open their ears, how they can balance this life of virtual reality versus getting dirty. I think it would be important.
Yeah. Well, and if we are going to do another one, I just want to put a shameless plug in for my book. Because it's out right now, and I'm going around and sort of trying to get people to connect with it. And if you read it, then we have an interesting conversation. It's by David Nichtern, me, Awakening from the Daydream, Reimagining the Buddha's Wheel of Life. If you have a chance to pick that up on Amazon or in your local bookstore or whatever, and then write to me and let me know what you're thinking about it. And it really is describing all the things we're talking about, Jake, which is where where is the human race getting stuck? It's an ancient message. It's like a message in a bottle from an ancient culture. It's completely relevant today, and that's what I try to do, is make it really, really accessible. And you see, okay, here's the different ways that we get stuck in different states of mind, and keep ourselves from experiencing, the fullest possibilities of the innate freedom and dignity of the human birth.
Well, I got my homework then. It's always great to talk to you, man. And we'll be in touch and set up a part 3.
Great. Okay. Thank you very much, Jake, for your time, and best wishes to everybody out there who's listening.
Absolutely, brother. Take care, man.
Okay.
Later.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Just another day at the office here on the Jake Feinberg Show. Message in a Bottle, Richard Green, and then David Nichtern. And that's it for us. We'll be back tomorrow with Albert Tootie Heath, great jazzer. For now, we'll rejoin the Jim Parisi Show.
We already, in my opinion, have as many listeners as 1 or 2 of them. So it's just different. It's different. And I've never said this on the air either. I've had people approach me about getting an FM station, about getting on the air another one.